Constant activities have been observed at North Korea's Punggye nuclear test site. US-based North Korea monitoring website 38 North says recent satellite imagery shows significant tunneling has taken place at the west portal throughout last month. Mining carts and personnel were consistently present, and the spoil pile has grown larger. Also, over 100 people were observed at the southern support area late last month, the reason for which is not known. The North Portal, where Pyongyang conducted its last 5 nuclear tests, that, however, remains inactive. 38 North sees these activities as North Korea's continued efforts to maintain the site's potential for future nuclear tests.
Just days after North and South Korea held their first face-to-face talks in 2 years, the U.S. Air Force is deploying stealth bombers to the Pacific. It comes at a time when the Pentagon is conducting a review of its nuclear forces, expected to be released early next month.
In a show of force, the Pentagon deployed 3 nuclear-capable B-2 stealth bombers along with 200 airmen to Guam overnight, closer to the Korean peninsula. Defense officials said the deployment had been scheduled for months.
I think when we move bombers across the globe, we send a signal to everyone.
The B-2 is just one component of the nuclear triad slated for upgrade. The U.S. nuclear arsenal has not been modernized in decades. Its missiles date back to the 1970s. This week, details of the Pentagon's long-awaited nuclear posture review leaked to the public and revealed the Trump administration wants more flexibility to respond with nuclear weapons to an attack. The U.S. wants to develop a new low-yield tactical version of the Trident missile launched from submarines. John Wolfstall, an arms control expert who worked for President Obama, has read the plan and is alarmed.
I think the document really goes off the rails by calling for the development of not one but 2 new types of nuclear weapons that would be deployed both on submarines and on surface ships. It talks about wanting to increase the role of nuclear weapons, that the United States might use them not in fewer situations but in more situations.
The idea is to make Russia think twice about using new land-based cruise missiles in Eastern Europe. The U.S. has accused Russia of violating the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Matthew Kroenig is the author of the upcoming book, The Logic of American Nuclear Strategy. He says Russia is forcing the U.S.'s hand.
Their plan is to use a number of small nuclear weapons early in the conflict to try to frighten us into backing down. And right now we don't have a good response to that.
This is the first nuclear posture review in 8 years. Past administrations all agree the nuclear triad needs to be modernized. What has experts concerned is that developing new tactical nukes is an expensive way to bargain with the Russians.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has won the latest standoff with the West over the regime's nuclear and missile programs. Speaking to reporters on Thursday, Putin also described Kim as a shrewd and mature leader. He added that Kim had achieved his strategic goal by acquiring a nuclear warhead and also a global-range missile. The glowing statement by the Russian president comes a day after the 2 Koreas held talks aimed at diffusing tensions.
Vladimir Putin is the #1 threat to democracy in Europe and the US. That's according to a new report published by US Senate Democrats. It took more than a year for its authors to compile the 200-page document. The report collects the most frequently voiced allegations against Russia, everything from political assassinations to state-sponsored doping and cyber attacks. It also contains a wide range of proposals aimed at protecting American democracy from alleged Russian meddling. For example, it proposes the creation of an international coalition to deal with any interference from Moscow and suggests spending millions of dollars to help Europe and Eurasia protect themselves.
The Moldovan government has passed a law effectively banning the rebroadcasting of Russian television programs on news, analysis, politics and military issues. The so-called media propaganda law was signed by the parliamentary speaker after the suspension of pro-Russia President Igor Dodon over the issue. Dodon had twice refused to sign the bill into law. The bill was put forward by Moldova's pro-Western government, led by Prime Minister Pavel Filip, and passed by pro-Western lawmakers in parliament. The president is frequently at odds with Filip and his government, which favours closer ties with the EU and the United States.
Weeks after Russian President Vladimir Putin all but declared victory in Syria, Russia's main military base in Syria, was attacked last weekend by a mysterious swarm of drones. Charlie Daggett looked into this.
Until now, rebel groups in Syria have used remote-controlled drones like the ones in these propaganda videos to drop bombs on targets. So now, picture 10 drones, all together, all weaponized, and all headed to the same target. The Russian Defense Ministry said it suffered the first mass attack by drones guided by a GPS system at its base in northwestern Syria. Another 3 targeted its naval base at Tartus. 7 drones were shot down. The remaining ones were electronically jammed and forced to land. Neither base suffered any casualties. The Russians released these pictures today showing what they recovered. Attack drones, partly made of wood and held together with masking tape. A deadly mix of low and high tech, according to former British Army weapons expert Pete Norton.
This particular attack is the number of drones involved against a single target and the fact that they've been launched on what appears to be a completely autonomous mission.
These drones can carry up to as many as 10 bombs each and have a longer range, more than 60 miles. The Russians claim that only countries with high-tech capabilities could have supplied the materials, but didn't specify any country. Our weapons expert told us all the materials are readily available on the market.
Europe and Iran are putting a united front in support of the nuclear deal at talks held in Brussels, as Washington is thinking of reimposing sanctions on Tehran. The European Union and the foreign ministers of Britain, Germany and France are uniting to defend the accord, which placed limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for relaxing or punishing sanctions, but which U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized and threatened to leave. Trump has to decide by Friday if he once again waivers the sanctions on Iran as demanded by the deal.
The U.S. Justice Department announced today plans to investigate Hezbollah. A special State Department task force will investigate what they call narco-terrorism by the powerful Lebanese movement, comprising specialists on money laundering, drug trafficking, terrorism, and organized crime. The task force will target Hezbollah's network, which reaches across Africa and into Central and South America. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the team will initiate prosecutions that will restrict the flow of money to foreign terrorist organizations.
The Sinn Féin recently boasted record numbers of prevented terror attacks. But despite these promising figures, the security agency has now released alarming new statistics that show the rate of attacks have dramatically increased as well. In fact, they've tripled since United States President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital on December 6th. There were 249 incidents reported in December throughout the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, most of them firebombings. Compare that to 84 in November and 71 in October. But the negative alleged consequences of President Trump's announcement don't stop there. With the heightened rate of attacks in mind, Israel was bumped into a number 2 position out of 4 on the United States' new travel warning system. The 2 signifies that the traveler should, quote, exercise increased caution when visiting that area, as opposed to a 1 meaning to exercise normal precautions. Interestingly, there has been a net decrease in attacks throughout the rest of Israel outside Jerusalem, going from 1 to 0. The travel warning can be explained when reading further. The West Bank, Gaza, and Israel have been paired together for a group rating of 2. But when specific details are read, instructions say not to travel to Gaza at all, to reconsider travel to the West Bank, and essentially just to be careful in Jerusalem. That being said, even Great Britain and Germany were rated a 2 under the new precautions. But with the new rating in place and threatening the economy, and the Sinn Féin's warning delivered to the Knesset, Israeli officials are all on their toes.
President Trump has cancelled his upcoming visit to London, reportedly amid fears of large-scale protests on his arrival. Trump confirmed the cancellation moments ago via Twitter, saying he has cancelled his appearance where he was expected to open the new US embassy in London because he was unhappy with the relocation and a bad deal was made by the Obama administration. No exact date for the visit has been secured. Reports say the US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson may host the embassy opening ceremony instead.
Police in Vienna have charged 3 men with provocation for waving an Israeli flag at pro-Palestinian demonstrators. The rally in December was in response to Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The Israeli activists deny they were being provocative, claiming they only produced their flag after having anti-Semitic abuse hurled at them.
It all started with slogans in English like "Down, down USA" or "Down, down Israel." Then we heard them shouting "Intifada," "Child murderer Israel," and "Death to Israel."
The president of the Belgian League Against Anti-Semitism says action should have been taken against the pro-Palestinian demonstrators.
The Austrian police, they should have arrested those people in this anti-Israeli demonstration who were shouting anti-Semitic slogans. We saw several incidents occurring those last weeks and months in Europe following the declaration of US President Donald Trump regarding Jerusalem, but also even more violent attacks those last years in several European countries, in Paris, in Toulouse, in Brussels and other places, in Copenhagen. Also, Jews were killed because they were Jews. So we are facing a violent wave of anti-Semitic actions, and it can lead even to killings of Jews in Europe today.
Greek authorities have seized a Tanzanian-flagged ship heading for Libya and carrying materials used to make explosives, the Coast Guard said on Wednesday. The vessel, which set off from Turkey, was carrying 29 containers with detonators, ammonium nitrate and special gel, all materials that can be used in building bombs. The Andromeda was intercepted off the coast of the Greek island of Crete and has been impounded in the port of Heraklion. All 8 members of the crew were arrested. Officially, Djibouti and Oman were the ship's destinations. However, there were no naval maps on board. During preliminary investigations by the Greek Coast Guard, the ship's captain stated that he received an order by the vessel's owner to unload and hand over the explosives in Misrata in Libya. European Union and United Nations imposed arms embargoes have prohibited the sale, supply or transfer of arms to Libya since 2011. Poland's president says that the EU is partly to blame for what he called social disillusionment. Andrzej Duda was speaking at a New Year reception for foreign ambassadors held at the presidential palace in Warsaw. He said EU institutions have been deaf to the needs of member states, pointing to Brexit and recent elections in some nations. European Union institutions should take their share of responsibility for this social disillusionment with the integration and should analyse the mistakes made. It's the task of European institutions to build a harmonious European policy, but not to stigmatise, divide and antagonise European nations. Poland has found itself at odds with the EU recently. On Tuesday, European Commissioner Chief Jean-Claude Juncker met the Polish Prime Minister in Brussels as part of an attempt to head off possible EU sanctions against the nation.
Just maybe, I'm reaching the point of thinking that we should have a second referendum on what? On EU membership.
The whole thing?
Yes, of course, of course.
That's British politician and former UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage entertaining the idea that the UK should vote again on whether to leave the European Union. Farage's statement has some pro-EU activists fired up about potentially turning around 2016's vote to call it quits with the EU. But Farage seems to think a second vote would wipe out opposition to the divorce and settle it once and for all.
The percentage that would vote to leave next time would be very much bigger.
The Leave vote won the so-called Brexit vote by a narrow margin, just 51.9%. The UK is scheduled to be on its own by March 29th, 2019.
The British Army is trying to keep up with the times by recognizing that its soldiers have emotional needs. Here's a look at how the new approach compares with the old.
You are nothing but unorganized, grabastic pieces of amphibian shit. You will not like me, but the more you hate me, the more you will learn.
The army is family. I've probably told them things I wouldn't even tell my own family. There's always someone there to talk to. or even just make you laugh.
The British Army ad is part of a campaign to attract a more diverse range of recruits. Here you can see the new ads compared with much older ones. A former UK intelligence officer, Philip Ingram, says he doesn't hold out much hope that the more inclusive approach will boost the numbers of recruits.
I was quite surprised to see these videos that are coming out. I do understand that there's been market research done suggesting that they should target more minority groups, but if they can't recruit enough people from the majority groups that the British military have traditionally recruited from, I don't see what the sense is in targeting these minority groups.
Indonesia's Air Force Twitter account has sparked a debate about whether gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people are allowed to serve in that military branch. On January 9th, the official account for TNI Angkatan Udara tweeted that every soldier is forbidden to commit immoral acts. When a follower of the Air Force account asked whether LGBT could join the service, the account responded by noting that applicants must pass a mental health test. The tweet noted that LGBT status is considered a mental disorder. The Air Force account also said soldiers are governed by religious and legal norms. The account linked to an article from a University of Indonesia psychiatrist saying LGBT behaviors can be classified as psychiatric disorders. While homosexuality isn't illegal in Indonesia, it is a much-discussed issue in the country.
The U.S. military in Afghanistan is investigating an incident in the eastern province of Nangarhar. In an apparent insider attack by members of a pro-government militia, one of its forces was wounded. Captain Tom Gressback is the public affairs director at the NATO-led Resolute Support Headquarters in Kabul. He confirmed there had been an active ground engagement in Achin district in which he said one U.S. service member had been wounded, but none killed. No comment was immediately available for provincial government officials.
2 people have died and several more have been injured in Pakistan after police fired live rounds at a group of protesters. Police say the protests, at first peaceful, turned violent and they had no choice but to fire to disperse the crowds. People have been protesting after the rape and murder of a young girl in the city of Kasur. 7-year-old Zainab Ansari was found in a rubbish dump. The protesters say the police are not taking the case seriously. This is the 12th case of a young girl being abducted and killed in the area within a year. Police say they've arrested several people in connection with the attack.
Tunisia has seen a third consecutive day of violent protests. Since the first rally on Monday, more than 600 people have been arrested, with 1 killed and around 50 injured.
Ecuador has granted citizenship to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange after more than 5 years of living in asylum at the nation's embassy in London. The country's foreign minister said Thursday that Assange was naturalized in the middle of last month at his request. Ecuador gave him political asylum at the embassy in 2012 to avoid extradition to Sweden to face a rape allegation which he denies vehemently to this day. Swedish prosecutors dropped the investigation last May, but Assange still faces arrest by British police on a charge of skipping bail if he leaves. He also fears a possible extradition to the US stemming from a leak of thousands of US military documents in 2010, but Washington is yet to seek his arrest.
Now the effects of the weather in Southern California. The death toll stands tonight at 17 in the mudslides that hit Santa Barbara County. That number could rise as the search continues for the missing. Carter Evans is there.
As new images of harrowing rescues and escapes emerge from across Southern California, the cleanup continues. The mass of mud, vehicles, and debris is slowly being cleared from Montecito neighborhoods and highways. Today, the search and rescue mission looks more like a recovery operation. Crews found a body in this home as the victim's family stood by. The floodwater was so powerful when it rushed down Randall Road here that it wiped out almost every single home on this block. These houses are worth upwards of $3 million. Now they're unrecognizable. Here's what it looked like from above before the flood. These are the boulders that came rolling down the mountain with floodwaters, and there was nothing that could stop them. You could see right where they blew through a wall of this home.
We heard this monstrous sound that was like a freight train.
Carrie Teig was trapped in her home and says she never got a mandatory evacuation order.
We couldn't go anywhere. Meanwhile, we were seeing people rescued off the roofs of houses that were just a few doors down.
Emergency managers say they warned residents days ahead of the storm, including tweets saying that flash flooding and debris flows were imminent. But the department hesitated to use a cell phone emergency alert system. They reportedly waited until 3:50 a.m. Tuesday morning to push out the alert, roughly 10 minutes ahead of the worst flooding. Santa Barbara County Emergency Manager Jeff Gator told the LA Times that he waited because if you cry wolf, people stop listening.
We would have evacuated. Everybody in my neighborhood would have. We all are families. We have kids. And if that was dictated to us, we would have followed the rules.
Neighbors tell me the family that lived here was sound asleep when the mudslide hit. Their children live in that room over there. A boulder went right through the wall. Fortunately, the family survived, but Jeff the sheriff says tonight as many as 43 people could still be missing.